applied to Newfoundland, which they never had before. Now, what was the effect of that between April 1st and May 27th? Well, for veterans, it meant that the pensions that had previously been paid to them by the independent Dominion of Newfoundland rose from $18 every 3 months to $30 every month under the Dominion of Canada, an increase from $72 a year to $360 a year. Now, that may not sound like big bucks today, but this was back in the times when the dollar was worth $1 and not 10 cents like today. That was big money for a veteran who never received that, never even dreamed of receiving that prior to Newfoundland joining Canada. By the end of April, the necessary calculations and entitlements had been done so that family allowance checks were mailed to all eligible for the first time in history at an average payment of $16.38 a month or $200 a year, money that those people had never thought of receiving before. Real money, checks from the government, checks that don't bounce. And they accepted the money in good faith and spent it. The first old age pension checks appeared simultaneously. Now, I only had an hour to do some research during question period because I wasn't on the list today to ask a question. I'll get on that tomorrow. So I did some research during that time. I didn't have enough time to check the rate of the old age pension in 1949, the federal rate, but I know that in Newfoundland prior to Confederation it was $25 once every 3 months to people over 70, but only to those over 70 who got on the list of people to be paid. And the way you got on the list was to be the first in the waiting lineup when somebody already on the pension died. Then you advanced and got the pension. $25 a month, once every 3 months. When Newfoundland joined Canada, it became a monthly payment of, I believe it was $45 a month. I may be wrong on that. If it was $45 a month, it would be $540 a year. Payable at age 70, I admit, not 65 like it is now, payable at 70, but to every Newfoundlander, rich or poor, who was 70 years or more. And they got that check in the month every mail thereafter. They got that check in the mail every month thereafter. The same mail formula that these Tories over here are planning on using in a month or so. Now, after all those checks flowed, what else happened? Well, the Honourable Paul Martin Sr. was brought to Newfoundland to campaign and widely introduced as the father of family allowances, also the father of old age pensions, lest people forget. And at every fishing village and at every town and village, he was introduced in that capacity, along with Premier Joseph Smallwood, who, if one was a father of family allowances, the other allowed himself the role of perhaps being the assistant father of family allowances. Second in command. The two of them together had delivered. Actually, the campaign slogan in that election was, "Let Joe finish the job." Let Joe, singular, finish the job of getting more of these benefits. And lest anyone forget, prior to the voting, the tobacco prices throughout the island were lowered appreciably, so that all those who smoked or chewed paid less. They got more for their pocket, but they paid less at the store to buy their favorite smoke or their favorite chew. So that was the formula. What were the results of the election, old chum? The results of the election were that the Liberals elected 21 seats out of 28 and got 65% of the vote. Now, that was a considerably higher percentage of the vote than Confederation had won in the referenda that were held on the question of should Newfoundland join Canada, because there were two of them. And in the second one, the yes side did win, but was only by a very small margin, about 51% to 49%. 2%. And actually, it was Jack Pickersgill, who was then clerk of the Privy Council, who remarked to Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent, or Mackenzie King, at the time, that actually the majority by which Confederation had won in Newfoundland was greater than the Prime Minister had won in his own riding in the last election. And that convinced Mackenzie King that probably it had credibility, should be accepted, and agreed to allow Newfoundland to join Canada. But when the election was held, later on, the Liberals won with 65% of the vote, meaning there was 14% that had voted against Confederation voted Liberal in the subsequent provincial election.
And what was the reason for that?
What was the reason for that? Ah, my good friend to my left. He always keeps me on the right track. Well, the reason for that I probably just outlined. But anyway, shortly after that, there was a federal election held. And the results in Newfoundland on the federal election of June 27th, one month after the provincial election, the results were 5 seats out of 7 went Liberal in Newfoundland. Now, I have no doubt that my good friend the Premier is aware of the history of Newfoundland. He probably studies it the way I do to get good ideas. But the problem is that what he's doing and what Joe Smallwood did in Newfoundland are two very different things. Because Joe Smallwood delivered the goods to the people. This crowd is delivering, well, I'm not allowed to say many unparliamentary words that I know you would be listening to, Mr. Speaker, but delivering that which is not real. How's that as a parliamentary term? Delivering that which is not real. A $155 payment in the mail is impressive. And if the Premier wants to send me such a check in the mail, I'll take it. I don't think there's anybody in this House, not even the member for Timberlea Prospect, that will send the check back. He might give it to foreign missions, but he might put it in his own pocket, which most people will. Most people will. Eh?
And the Premier
But
knows that.
at the same time as they're doing that, they're plunging the province deeper and deeper into debt. They're planning an outpouring of public spending. Let me tell you about the flood, Mr. Speaker. I know I'm not talking about Noah's flood. I'm talking about John's flood. The costs of paying for John's recent flood will be greater than the amount by which they say the province is in a surplus this year. The flood has wiped out their surplus. It's flooded it out. It's put them back into a deficit if they do what they say they're going to do. And I'm combining two elements to say that. I'm talking about homeowner compensation, people whose basements have been flooded and everything down there ruined, and repair to the highways and bridges and of the public transportation system. Put those two together, and you get a much bigger number, no matter what arithmetic you use, even the new math, than the Minister of Finance uses in projecting what he says the increase in the surplus is. According to this chart, it shows an increase in surplus of 8.5. Is that right? I can't read that. What's that number down there? 8.5 million dollars?
Yeah.
Yeah. I need new glasses, I agree. Well, the costs of fighting the flood are about $12 million.
85.
Now, 12 minus 8 is minus 4.
85.2.
85 points. Well, I can't read the fine print in there. You see, it's designed so that the average person can't read it, Mr. Speaker. It's designed just with a bar graph so you get the picture of increases in the surplus. But you can't read the little number at the bottom showing what they say it is, because it's not very big. And that's the one I've got here, yes, in royal blue. You just received a call. When you get home tonight, it will be in your mailbox. That's where you'll find it. Now, this piece of Tory propaganda is Tory propaganda. It's not nonpartisan, objective, actuarial or analytical or auditorial analysis of the public finances of the province. It's their own story, patting themselves on the chest and saying how good we are, how great we are. Table it. Very well, let it be tabled. Front and back.
Speaker should listen to your advice.
Well, this is being paid for by the government through the Progressive Conservative Party of Nova Scotia, I'm told. I just tabled it. No, it doesn't say Progressive Conservative Party of Nova Scotia at all. It says Nova Scotia, let's keep growing, www.gov.ns.ca/finance. So this Tory propaganda is put out by the Minister of Finance. He raises his hand to say we. Yes. Well done. All right, and then on the front part it says the same website again, and then Nova Scotia with a little cross of St. Andrew overhead, not backwards but forwards, I trust. And
Speaker will rule on
maybe
that
the Speaker could rule on whether this is appropriate use of public funds, just on the brink of a provincial election. Lower taxes for a stronger economy, it says. Nova Scotia, let's keep growing. I bet you, Mr. Speaker, you will see those words over and over in the ensuing weeks that lie ahead. Yeah. No, Joey Smallville wouldn't do that at all. Joey would deliver the goods and then let the people vote accordingly. Well, I don't know how much time I have left because I'm just starting to get warmed up. I think I started at 1:56. Have we got 2 or 3 minutes left? Perhaps.
Order, please. The honourable member has approximately 2 minutes.
2 minutes. All right, well, that's just hardly enough to get warmed up. But I wanted to say that in my resolution earlier today incorporating various languages, I mentioned that the appropriate response in any language you care to name is no thank you. To the Conservative, nie dziękuję is Polish, po polsku. Yes. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have two speakers here to my right and to my left, but I'll focus this away if I might. I just wanted to say that that is the response that we hope to encourage people to adopt in the days and weeks that may lie ahead in this abbreviated session of the House, because this is probably our last chance to hold them up to scrutiny and let them produce the pudding, let them produce the pie, and demonstrate where their mathematics is superior to old-style arithmetic consisting of addition and subtracting the costs of fighting the flood from the surplus that they have announced, and seeing what remains. And the answer, Mr. Speaker, is a deficit remains. A deficit will probably grow larger as the flood damage is more and more costed out, and the final tally made of what it will take to bring back our roads, our bridges, and our homes to the condition that existed prior to the recent flood. I thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I am very pleased to participate in this debate going into supply here this afternoon, and again, quite honored to follow the veteran and venerable member from Cape Breton Nova. However, I will say that usually I find he is quite comprehensive in his presentations and discourses here in the legislature. However, today I'm not quite sure just what he was talking about, but I know that he is very well aware himself as to what he was speaking about. My colleague to the left, figuratively speaking, suggests he was talking about Newfoundland. But nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to talk a little bit today about the flood that happened essentially during the last weekend in March, and a lot of people would concur that March, in fact, did go out like a lion. The constituency of Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley received considerable damage as a consequence of the flood. There was a number of bridges that were, quite frankly, ruined, Mr. Speaker, as a result of the flood. And the residents and motorists and, of course, the truckers that travel Nova Scotia's highways and byways in the ridings that were flooded had to put up with quite a bit of inconvenience. And I'm very grateful that the riding of Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley did not experience any loss of life or limb. And I think that that is certainly a tribute not only to the residents in the riding, but to other Nova Scotians that were visiting Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, and also a tribute to the first responders, the Upper Stewiacke Volunteer Fire Department, for example, Mr. Speaker, and our very own Department of Transportation and Public Works in Upper Stewiacke at the base there, and at the base in Brookfield, and at the base in Middle Musquodoboit. The Department of Transportation employees and the operational supervisors, the area managers, and our district directors, Jim Talbot and, yes, Peter Merritt, worked extremely hard to make the inconvenience more tolerable for the residents. And I'm absolutely delighted, and I tip my hat to the Department of Transportation employees and those individuals that were in a supervisory capacity. And not too long ago, Mr. Speaker, at the Middle Musquodoboit base, the operational supervisor, Gerard Chisholm, invited me to drop by, as did the area manager, Dave Van Slyke, to drop by for an Employee Appreciation Day. And I had an opportunity, I'd like to tell all members in the House, to address the workers and just state how pleased I was that they worked so diligently and without second thought about responding when they receive calls at all hours of the days and nights, 7 days a week. So we're very blessed in this province all over to have such a responsible Department of Transportation Public Works workforce, Mr. Speaker. And I will tip my hat to the member from Hants West and, of course, to the member from Lunenburg, who worked very closely hand in glove with the employees. Mr. Speaker, in the Upper Stewiacke area, just this past Friday, April the 4th, the Premier and a delegation from his office was kind enough to come up to the beautiful Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley and visit some of the devastation and ruin that actually took place as a consequence of the storm at the end of March. And some of the businesses in the area have been greatly handcuffed as a result of the storm, including the largest sawmill in the province of Nova Scotia, Macterra, with some 300 direct jobs. Macterra was, in fact, very, very concerned about their ability to sustain during the flood, immediate aftermath, at least, of the flood. And through the hard work of the Department of Transportation and Public Works, the Minister, the Honourable Michael Baker, and the Minister of Emergency Measures Organization, the Honourable Tim Olive, and of course the Premier, we were able to make arrangements to see a bridge be replaced that will enable Macterra and Mosier Limestone and Atlantic Explosives, Taylor Lumber, and some of the businesses that provide much-needed jobs in the Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley. We were able to have arrangements made to see that those businesses can sustain. And of course, it's the businesses in Nova Scotia that pay the payroll taxes and help with the health and education and transportation, community services, right across the whole gamut, Mr. Speaker. It's the businesses in Nova Scotia that help provide those services. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I think sometimes it takes an unfortunate event to make people step back and realize how blessed we are in Nova Scotia and how blessed we are to have so many bona fide employers and employees. And we never must forget the employees. But some of the roads, and they may not be familiar to members in the legislature, but some of the 200 and 300 series highways that were impacted in Colchester-Musquodoboit were, for example, Route 236. Now, Route 236, the member for Cape Breton Nova may know because he follows the geography pretty closely in the province, but Route 236 essentially runs from Lower Truro right over to the Green Oaks Bridge, and it meets up with the 289 at the junction in Pleasant Valley. Well, Lower Truro, of course, was greatly flooded, and as a consequence, motorists and residents couldn't travel between Truro and Lower Truro, Old Barnes, Green Oaks, and Ryan's Creek, and so on. Yes, the honourable member for Cape Breton Nova was there and claims he saw the lineups. Now, on Route 357, which runs between Middle Musquodoboit and Musquodoboit Harbour, a couple of places were flooded, and for 2 or 3 days, people that travel along that highway had to do some detouring and things of that nature. And Route 224, another bridge, two-lane, nice bridge, was completely destroyed on Route 224 between the Moose River Road and Middle Musquodoboit, and that's a distance of about 7 miles. It happened in the small community of Elmsvale, not to be confused with Elmsdale. I know the honourable member for Hants East would not want that confusion to exist, and I certainly don't, but it was Elmsvale. It's right close to the Moose River Gold Mines Road. That bridge is out, but I've learned today that as a result of all the government departments, emergency measures, and the local people really cooperating. And the residents are putting up with some inconvenience because there's approaches going across, you may say, some of their properties, both east and west. But the people have been very supportive of a temporary bridge going in so traffic can commute back and forth on Route 224. And likewise, up on in the Upper Stewiacke area, once the bridge is put in Springside, it will enable traffic that's going from Mactara to Kimberley-Clark, for example. And Kimberley-Clark gets approximately 35 or 40% of their wood chips from the largest sawmill in the province, Mactara. Well, this will enable Mactara to ship their wood chips up the Route 336 across the new portable bridge that will handle commercial traffic onto Route 289 and up through Pictou, up through the Pictou West riding onto Kimberley-Clark and the Abercrombie. So we're very pleased to see that this government and the people responded in such a positive way, Mr. Speaker, and extremely delighted that the Premier took time out of his very busy schedule to come up and check things out and get a real bird's eye view, so to speak, a first-hand experience and knowledge of just how the folks were quite traumatized in the Upper Stewiacke area. So we're very pleased that the Premier came out, very pleased with the response. And although there was disaster and ruin, I would have to say in Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, I am particularly pleased with the efforts that all appropriate people and agencies have made to somehow remediate the situation. So we're very, very pleased. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to speak also a little bit about a couple of communities in the member for Cumberland South's riding, and that would be Oxford and Advocate. I understand that the member for Cumberland South is absolutely delighted that all the first responders in Cumberland South, all those appropriate, responded and really went over and above and beyond what is the call of duty to bring Oxford and Advocate back into some semblance of order. And I think most people in this House would recognize that the good member for Cumberland South was probably behind the scenes and encouraging those appropriate to do the right thing, because, you know, as MLAs in this House, irrespective of political stripe, I think we're all here for the same thing, and that is to serve our constituents to the best of our ability. And, you know, some of my proudest moments, my most honored moments, is to be able to achieve things on behalf of my constituents. And I know that other members, in fact, the member for Halifax Fairview explained yesterday that some of his major accomplishments as an MLA happened right in the riding, right in the physical riding. And the member for Cumberland South also has advised me, by way of a third party, that the minister, the Honourable Tim Olive, the minister responsible for EMO, also visited the Oxford and Cumberland County areas. And I know the member for Cumberland South is absolutely delighted that the minister took time out of his busy schedule to in fact visit those areas. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to shift gears a little bit, so to speak, and speak a little bit about the Federal Firearms Act. And Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by commending the Honourable, the member for Truro Bible Hill and Minister of Justice in this province, and again, the very busy member for Cumberland South, and the good member for the Eastern Shore. All members in the House should know that those three members of the Nova Scotia legislature just Monday past took time out of their busy schedule to travel to Ottawa and state their position to the Solicitor General in this province, or pardon me, in this country, Wayne Easter, and that is that they are very much opposed to the long gun registration component of the gun registry. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know you're not allowed, and of course you know more so than most, that you can't acknowledge the presence or absence of members in the House. But interestingly enough, last Wednesday evening during debate on the gun registry, the $1 billion boondoggle, I will say that one of the caucuses, see, it says individual members, but one of the caucuses was not present for that debate. Now, Mr. Speaker, we submitted a resolution. We submitted a resolution in this chamber about a $1 billion boondoggle, and I would say that honourable members can draw their own conclusions as to who was here and who wasn't here. And I won't get into members, and I promise the Speaker I won't. But the fact of the matter is, they should be ashamed of themselves that nobody in that caucus could stand and defend the $1 billion boondoggle. You know, Mr. Speaker, just last week I had a senior citizen from Middle Stewiacke call me. She said, Brooke, look, I have 3 rifles, 3 long guns. I've never used them. They're heirlooms. There's a 45-70, there's a 12-gauge shotgun, and an Ace single-shot 22. I can't find the serial numbers on those firearms. They were my late husband's, and they were passed on to my late husband from his father, and I'd like to register those firearms, Mr. Speaker. You know, and that's a shame that the Liberal caucus, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal caucus cannot defend such things that have been imposed, such measures that have been imposed on the citizenry of Nova Scotia. And it's all Nova Scotia. It's just not rural Nova Scotia. It's urban areas, it's suburban areas, and you know, it's really very, very disappointing. And to add insult to injury and to put salt on the wound, just a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, you sure? Mr. Speaker, but just a week or so ago, once again, because Chrétien, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, intimidated his whole cast, they voted once again to approve, with the support of the Bloc Québécois, and we know what their agenda is, they approved another $72 million expenditure. Say it isn't so. Somebody stand. I'll yield my time, and I have lots of it left. I'll yield my time to a member in the Liberal caucus to stand. Because it was $59 million, yes, Mr. Speaker. It may have been $59 million, but I know that yourself and the member for the Eastern Shore and the Minister of Justice went to Ottawa to present Nova Scotia's case. You know why? They say it's a federal issue. You know why they're saying that? Because they haven't got the courage, the intestinal fortitude, or the guts to stand up in their place and say that, look, I absolutely object to this Federal Firearms Act. Why won't they stand up for Nova Scotians when they know something is wrong? Why won't you stand up on behalf of the Nova Scotians, on behalf of the constituencies? You know, Mr. Speaker, it's just disgraceful that you won't even stay around for debate.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker.
The member's time has expired. The motion is carried. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, would you please call the estimates of the Minister of Health?
Thank you, Minister. Time being 2:26, I'd like to recognize the Liberal caucus. The member from Dartmouth East has 14 minutes to ask questions to the Minister of Health. And member, you have the floor. The member from Dartmouth East. In just a moment, while staff taking their seats. Okay. Member, you have the floor. Thank you. 14 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair, I'd just like to return to some matters following last evening's intervention during the debate on the estimates, and a few short comments on the budgeting process in general. It's becoming increasingly difficult to follow the estimates and the flow of money through, particularly from Ottawa, where it's finding its way into various programs, some generally specifically designated for specific programs, and others that allow some flexibility. Flexibility seems to be the key word. Many of the members of the government bench are using that word when flexibility when referring to various programs. Certainly makes accountability more difficult and puts more pressure on those that are responsible for signing off on this budget and ascertaining and also verifying that it is a legitimate budget and that it is in the money is in the places where it's supposed to be. Because we know when money is not where it should be, that is generally considered to be fraud in the accounting business, my understanding, what limited knowledge I have of that. So we as an opposition have an obligation, and we've come to the House during these times to hold this government accountable on how it is using money that is flowing, particularly from Ottawa, which is taxpayers' money, and Nova Scotian taxpayers' money, and along with money gathered in different ways from the federal government, obviously. So one would assume in preparing a budget that one would look at what is spent last year, and then what, if any, additional pressures can be expected this year, and then incorporating that into the budgets. Incorporating numbers that reflect a basic set of assumptions and pressures. And that's what was my point today about the Pictou area and the District Health Authority there, where they had an increase, a substantive increase last year, and this year less money. One would think, well, then where are the pressures? The government seems to be saying, well, there's not pressures. We've actually relieved a lot of pressure from that area, particularly that Aberdeen hospital. But yet we know that there's one just short of a sign of no vacancy on the hospital at times when they're into lockdown mode and diversion is taking place. So one has trouble following the logic here to maintain good accounting practices during that time. So in that brief summary, from a layman's point of view, most accountants, I think, would probably tell you that is how a budget is prepared. It's using the process that the budget becomes defensible, and that's what the job of the minister is here today, is to come to this House of the Assembly and be accountable, and that's our job as opposition members, is to hold that minister and that government accountable. So that, following a proper process of accountability and transparency, that the numbers can be easily defended at the end of the day, and that those numbers, in fact, do represent reality, both from a legal point of view and from a professional accounting point of view. And I can't help, the more that I'm looking at the budgets for the district health authorities and wondering whether the numbers used in the health budget followed this process. Are these numbers defensible at the end of the day? Do they really, Mr. Chair, reflect the realities of what's being faced out there in our healthcare system? Or are the numbers being used merely as plugs? In other words, plugging in numbers that are inserted so that everything balances at the end of the day. And I have to ask myself whether this is indeed what is happening in this budget and is reflected in the estimates that we are holding the minister and her staff accountable for here today. It's ultimately the minister, as we well know. Based on these comments, one must have questions relating to the specific district health authorities. As I mentioned earlier, District Health Authority number 6, Pictou County, on page 12.15 of the supplementary detail. And despite the fact that District Health Authority number 6 experienced an increase of 9.1% in the years 2002-2003, they have a reduction this year of 0.2%. Mr. Minister, through Mr. Chair to you, this is a district health authority that, despite its government's increased commitment to district health authorities, has reduced their budget. So one would ask the question, why has District Health Authority number 6 in the Pictou area budget been reduced? Why, in light of increased costs in health care and the fact that they've experienced a 9.1% increase last year, would you reduce that particular district health authority. The questions you might ask, Mr. Chair, would be, are there fewer people in the system? Pictou that much of an aging community? Are there less costs? Are there fewer nurses? Fewer doctors? Are patients being transferred to other district health authorities? That's an important point, because we know that money should flow through the system, and within the system, the dollar should follow the patient. So are patients being transferred? Have there been closures of certain services that are being provided in another area? Why a reduction in light of last year's performance? What has changed so dramatically to justify this budget slashing? Mr. Chair, I want to briefly turn to the Capital District Health Authority, and as another district health authority. That has seen an increase of $4.5 million in their budget, roughly. This equals a 0.9%, not even a 1% increase. Yet last year, according to the numbers provided to us, there was an increase of 1.2%. How is it reasonable to expect that a 0.9% increase, less than 1% increase, will cover costs when the increased cost last year was recorded at 1.2%? Could the minister maybe indicate in her comments, indicate when the forecasted number for the Capital District was obtained? According to page 12.16 of the supplementary detail, the deficit for Capital District is forecasted to be about $5.3 million. Yet, we clearly recall and have copies of reading an article before Christmas that the district health deficit at that time was projected to be between $6 and $7 million. That's with several months left to go. One would have to question, and I question, whether the forecasted numbers used are realistic and whether the new budget numbers, which would be based on the forecasted numbers, are accurate. Is there an accuracy there? And we'd like maybe to hear an explanation of that. Because we are a little suspicious here, and maybe more than a little suspicious, that some wink-wink, nudge-nudge work has been happening here, going on between the department and the district health authorities. In other words, just stay quiet. Don't panic when you see the budget. We'll help you later. Just play along with this. Is this in fact true? And are these budgets just using numbers to plug in numbers and to give an appearance of balance to ride out this next election? As an opposition on this side of the House, we are asking that question. And I think we have reason to answer that question, to ask that question and expect a forthright and open answer. Perhaps where my time will be limited, I just have one further issue that I would like to address, and it's on page 12.6 of the estimate book. And under Adult Protection Services, took over $500,000 hit in their budget. That represents a 79% cut, pretty substantive. And this, Mr. Chair, to the minister, this minister impacts greatly on seniors in our province. The need is there, albeit sadly that it's needed, but it is. And most cases that are dealt with in adult protection are seniors. And could the minister explain why this component of the continuing care budget was reduced so dramatically, almost 80% cut? And what part, specifically, what part of adult protection services is being cut? And it's forecast that the adult protection services will have spent $832,000 when all is said and done in the 2002 and 2003 budget. Yet this year, they're expected to do with $175,000, cut from $832,900 to $175,000. Why is that being done to the care of adult protection, mainly for our seniors.
Thank the member from Dartmouth East, and I would like to recognize the Minister of Health. But before I do that, member, would you permit an introduction? Thank you. I'd like to recognize the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, and Municipal Relations on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to draw the attention of the members to the House to the East Gallery. You'll see sitting there Mr. Don Swicker. He's up from Lunenburg. He's also the president of the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. He's here today to encourage us all to do speedy passage on the bill that they have requested us to do, the Union of Nova Scotia Amendment Bill. So I'd ask the House to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Swicker.
House does welcome you, sir. Hope you're enjoying your afternoon. I'd like to recognize the Minister of Health in response to Dartmouth East's question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I do have answers to those questions. And I would like to say, though, that the department staff, including the Chief Financial Officer, have worked very hard on these statements to make them as accurate as possible. And I know the member from Dartmouth East recognizes what a job it is in such a big department, and he recognizes good people. Mr. Chair, in the first question of detail was raised around the Pictou District Health Authority. And the answer to that, briefly, is that estimate to estimate, the budget is going up. Forecast to estimate does show a decrease. I believe actually one of the reporters asked that question in the lockup, because there was an overestimation of wages in last year's budget. And that is the bulk of the money, although there was also an issue of an orthopedic program that was set up. The costs there make a difference too. But overall, the budget of that health authority has gone up 8.8%, which is in line with the increases in other health authorities. The next question was around the Capital District. And yes, they did have a deficit, Mr. Speaker, and we forgave that deficit. But as well, there were some costs that we took over in-house. And pardon me, I have to get my magnifying glass out here because the print is so small. Pathologist fees transferred to alternative funding, for example, for about $2.4 million. Wage.
Nursing program?
Yes, sorry, the nursing education transfer to the Department of Education from the Capital District for about $1.2 million.
And dialysis.
And dialysis transfer to DHA 8. And there was also a budget adjustment for mental health. So again, if you look, there are explanations for these numbers. We're not trying to hide anything. And the Capital District's budget has gone up in line with other DHAs. The question was asked regarding adult protection.
This explains why.
And the decrease, again, I have to get my magnifying glass here, is due to the reallocation of professional and legal services to care coordination. So again, we have not certainly dramatically cut that budget by any means. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Time has expired for the Liberal caucus in turn. I would like to recognize the NDP caucus and would recognize the member from Dartmouth Cole Harbour, 1 hour in turn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to engage in a discussion of the estimates of the Minister of Health. Obviously, this process is one that is important for us all in terms of being able to understand what it is that the program of government is and how they intend to fund it. And it's no secret at all, Mr. Speaker, that I have been very disappointed in the performance of the Department of Health over the last little while. I should say, to be qualified, that the ministers in that department over the last number of years, because of their inability to recognize what is important in the lives of Nova Scotia, Nova Scotians. And particularly that's the case with respect to long-term care, Mr. Speaker, which I can tell you right now, Mr. Speaker, I consider the long-term care system in this province to be brutalizing. What it does is it strips people of their dignity. It takes away virtually every cent that they have, and it impoverishes them in a way that is so fundamentally unfair that it is hard to believe that it is a system that has been allowed to perpetuate itself in this province. And I can tell you, I've gone community by community through this province and had people come out to public meetings and pour out their hearts about the way in which their family and their loved ones have been treated in this system, and the way that things that they worked a lifetime for to try and build up a little something that signifies all the work that they've done over their lifetime, only to see it to be totally consumed. To pay for services that they see readily provided to everyone else as part of the publicly funded Medicare system. And you know, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, in the recent announcements, you know, the minister has tried to say that this is, you know, some kind of stepwise progress, Mr. Speaker. But you know something, you don't recognize that something is wrong and say, look, we understand that this is, you know, fundamentally wrong, that the people of Nova Scotia don't approve of this system, but we are going to allow it to continue for years after the exhaustion of our mandate. We intend to put thousands of more people through this system and allow to happen to other citizens in our province what has already happened to so many thousands of people who have already been allowed to go through that system. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, you will know that earlier today I tabled in the House of Assembly a briefing note that talked about the fairness issue within within the long-term care, and particularly it talked about the fact that one of the things that the changes did in November was to allow for a spousal exemption, so that you could essentially designate $25,000 of an asset and have that transferred over to your spouse. Now, this is done by the government in a positive way. It is said to them, well, because you have a spouse, this is exempted. But, Mr. Speaker, if you turn that on its head and have a look at it, what it really is, it's a discriminatory practice. And what it says is that people who are married and enter the long-term care system will be treated differently than those who are single who enter the long-term care process, the assessment process. So, Mr. Chairman, if you are a widow or a widower, someone who does not have a spouse living at home, you're treated even more differently than people who are married. So this is a system of compound discrimination. In the first place, people who are entering the long-term care facility are treated differently than everyone else in the province who receive their medical care covered as part of the publicly paid Medicare system. And then once you get into the system, they are then divided up, and people who are single are then treated completely differently than people who are married. And I guess the question that I have for the minister is very, very simple. You know, what in the name of all that's good and great is the justification for discriminating against people in such a fashion?
Thank you, member, for the question. I'd like to recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the $25,000 exemption for a spouse, we decided to go that route in order to leave the spouse or dependent to be with more money than they had before. And that was the reason for the decision. It was not an intent to discriminate. It was an attempt to provide more resources for the person still in the community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to recognize the member from Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
Let me ask this simple question, if I get a simple answer on it. Does the minister recognize that two people who enter the assessment system on the same day, who can be of exactly the same age and have exactly the same financial system or financial resources, will be treated differently based on their marital status?
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I recognize, and the government recognizes, that there are many things about the system that are unfair. We moved to correct some of them. We'll be moving to correct more of them. And it is not eventually, it is 4 years. We are doing that because we believe there are unfairnesses in the system, and we're moving to correct them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
I wonder if the minister could remind us how many people are in the long-term care system now.
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health. Minister of Health.
Most of them are filled, about 5,800.
We have, Mr. Chair, about 5,800 beds, and most of them are filled. Of course, at any one time, roughly 80% of those are public pay patients. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Would you like to recognize the Leader of the Opposition?
Does the minister know approximately how many people will go through or flow through the system over the next 4 years?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is roughly about, on average, 2,000 a year who would be going through the system. So over the next 4 years, that would obviously be 8,000. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Leader of the Opposition.
So even on, that doesn't take into account, of course, Mr. Chairman, the fact that demographics are increasing, that there are, in fact, a shortage of long-term care beds. One would hope there would be some increase in that regard. So what that means, Mr. Chairman, just so we all know, is that there are going to be another 8,000 people in this province who are going to be systematically stripped of virtually everything that they have worked a lifetime to try and save. And they're going to be put through this system over the next 4 years because the government has decided that it's more important to send out a $155 check than it is to support the seniors and the people in long-term care facilities who all their life have paid taxes to support the government of this province. I mean, that is the sad and what always bothers me, I guess, about this discussion is that in many times the government treats us as if this is a rhetorical thing, as if it somehow is an exaggeration. But it is exactly what happens. Exactly, Mr. Chairman. And I guess that's what makes it so profound, is the fact that these people, most of them who are defenseless, people who have no one to advocate on their behalf, are left to the mercy of a system which was supposed to be there to advocate on their behalf at a time. It was supposed to be there to respond to their needs at a time when they were unable to care for themselves. And that's what I find so completely disappointing about the way in which the government continues to treat these people. And I want to be clear about this, Mr. Chairman. I don't blame this government in particular. They did inherit the system. But the reality is that they have had 4 years in which to become familiar with it, and they have had ample opportunity in which to deal with it. They could have dealt with it in this budget. And there is no clearer choice between the choice to spend money by handing out what is essentially just a pre-election gimmick and supporting people who earnestly and honestly and compassionately demand your assistance. Mr. Speaker, that is the choice that you have in your estimates. That's what's reflected in here. They're not just, people look at them and see just numbers on a page, but that's not the case, Mr. Speaker. In each one of these estimates hangs the life of some person and how they're going to be treated by the government that they supported. And on these counts, Mr. Chairman, we have, and I say this, collectively, we as society have failed to provide these people with what they ought to have, the support they ought to have. I'm going to move on for a second. I may come back to this, but I'm going to move on for a second because earlier today, I heard the Minister of Health talk about the pharmacare system and talk about how there was increased support for the seniors of this province through pharmacare. So I wanted to ask the Minister of Health if she could remind me what the premium was when she was elected and what the premium is today.
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health. The Minister of Health.
It may take a few moments to go back to the actual amount of the premium in 1999, but I will provide that information. If I may respond to some of the previous remarks, I would simply like to remind the Leader of the Opposition, I know he knows this, that of the thousands of people that will be coming into the long-term care system, about 20% or about 1,600 of those would still be private pay, and that we will be making improvements for those people. But the system is there for those people and the people who are on private pay. Is it the best system in the world? Not necessarily. Is the way of of doing assessments entirely fair? No, not necessarily. But the fact is that we are moving on this, and we have been moving on it for 3 years. The wait list for nursing homes was the most serious wait list problem we faced on coming to office, which is the reason that we tackled it, that we tried to bring the nursing homes in under in a coordinated way to go to a provincial waiting list. We were the last province in the country to start single entry access, but we did do it, and we were making progress before that. I recognize not enough progress for some people, but it was certainly progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Sorry, I actually missed the first part of what the Minister said about, was she going to supply the premium information now, or?
Would you like the Minister to
Yes,
answer that? Thank you, Minister. Yes, she nods yes. Member of the Opposition.
Yeah. Well, as often happens, the minister gives a response, and in response to the response, I can only say this is, completely different than what was said at the November press conference. I was there. The officials of your department were asked how many people coming into the system come in with some assets. The reply was almost everybody comes in with something, and then a further reply was that about 50% of them, when they come in, have something that takes at least some period of time to be depleted. And I think they indicated that most people had been pretty much stripped of their assets by the end of a year, I think was what I recall hearing at that time. And of course, the absolute truth is that after you take everything that they have, you then subsidize their care. It's not, and they talk about the numbers and they say, well, 80% of the people in the system are subsidized. Well, after you take everything, of course they're subsidized. They have nothing left. And you can't put them back out on the street. I met with administrators at long-term care facilities that said to me, even if somebody shows up at my facility and says, look, I don't want to go through the assessment process, I'm prepared to pay privately, and so I don't want to do that. I said, we won't take them. We won't take them, because what happens if they run out of money? If they haven't gone through the assessment process for the Department of Health, and we don't have an agreement with the Department of Health to support them while they're in the facility, and they run out of money, we can't put them out on the street, and then we'd be stuck with them. We'd be stuck with them. That's what they said. So, whether you like it or not in this province, you're going to end up going through the assessment system. They have built, an eligibility review unit that, was designed to efficiently identify the amount of wealth that an individual had, decide how long that it would support the health care services that were required within the facility, and then systematically, month by month, take what it is that they had. I mean, that's the reality of this situation, as brutal and as unbelievable as it seems, but that's what exists today, and that's what will exist tomorrow. And if this government is reelected, it will exist until 2007. And then, of course, we have to depend on them to, of course, do what it is they say they're going to do. And despite all the huffing and puffing of the government, the reality is there is a long list of commitments that this government made in '98, some with respect to pharmacare, I might add, and then in '99 that they simply ignored. So I think the skepticism of people with respect to that is really quite something. I wanted to ask a question. I suppose that there are some people who are in long-term care facilities because they may have, in the year before they came in, they may have had a catastrophic illness of some kind, or may have had investment income of some kind, who would have paid income tax. So can the minister tell me, will these people receive the $155 check, and then will the government take it back?
The Minister of Health.
The other checks that come.
The Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, we had not discussed that issue, but staff informed me that other checks that come in terms of rebate checks and so on, the residents keep. So although I will consult further, it would seem that would follow this pattern. Mr. Chair, earlier the member asked about the premium, the pharmacare premium when we came to office, and it was $215. And it went up in 02, 03 to $336. And that's where it is now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Yes. Okay, before we get off of this on the $155 check, it was, as I understand it, not meant to be treated as income. It's not going to be treated as taxable income. So I would urge for some small number of people in those facilities who might benefit from this, that the minister make the decision and exercise her discretion and see to it that at least they are entitled to keep that. Because, you know, Mr. Chairman, I intend to come back to the pharmacare program, but since we're going into this a little deeper, I'd like to point out that the memo that I tabled, one of the suggestions, one of the recommendations in that memo was that the long overdue increase to seniors' monthly allowances be increased. And I guess I'd like to ask the minister, since that was the recommendation, and I mean clearly what it says in this memo is that this present policy discriminates on the basis of wealth, essentially, that those who are rich and come into the system are treated differently than those who are poor and come into the system. I wonder if the minister could tell us why the decision was made not to act on the recommendation to increase the monthly allowance.
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there are many things that staff in the department would like to do to improve the system that we have in long-term care, to improve the fairness, and increasing that monthly allowance is one of them. That may in fact happen, but that is not a promise I'm prepared to make at this point, at least not for this year, because we have not budgeted for that. But it is certainly one of the issues that we will be looking at in the coming years. And certainly staff feel very strongly that a change should be made there, and I agree, but there are other things we have to look at as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your answer, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, my recollection, maybe the minister knows this, my recollection is that the finance minister has indicated to the House that the cost associated with sending out $155 to every person who paid $1 of income tax in this province is in the area of $68 million. Could the Minister of Health indicate to the House whether or not $68 million would be adequate to pay the costs associated with long-term care that needs still to be covered?
The Minister of Health. The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I said last night, in this debate on health estimates, I'm not here to argue the merits or otherwise of lowering taxes. That was a promise that we made in 1999, and that is a promise that we felt obliged to keep and are keeping. I understand very well the member's question, that could that money not go elsewhere? And certainly the government could have chosen to put that money to satisfy many, many needs in the system. But what we feel that we have done here, at the end of the day, we fight our battles for our budgets in Cabinet, that we are trying to put our new money in the places of the highest priority, that long-term care is one of those priorities. Seniors are one of the priorities. But we have other areas that we have to look after, like cardiac care, like increases to the DHAs, like wage increases. There are many, many pressures on the system, and does this budget answer them all? No. And I'm not sure that they ever will, but we feel we've made the right decisions in terms of trying to put more money in health and education and other areas where it's needed, as well as keeping our promise of lowering taxes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chairman, I just get glasses, so I know I'm losing some of my eyesight, but I think I must be losing my hearing as well, because my question to the minister was pretty simple. I asked whether or not $68 million would be sufficient to cover the remaining costs that are not covered in healthcare costs and long-term care.
The Minister of Health.
The answer to that, of course, is yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
There, that was easy, right? So I want to go back. I started on a little bit of a dissection now of the pharmacare program, and I want to return to that because, as I said, I'd heard earlier the minister say that they were relieving some of the pressure on seniors by capping pharmacare costs, saving them money, and I think I just had the minister tell me that, in fact, what had happened since this government has come to power is that the premiums have actually increased from $215 to $336. That's my understanding of the answer that was given by the minister. Of course, that's not the only cost that the seniors pay. So I'd like to ask the minister if she could tell me what changes have been made in the copay since her government came to power.
The Minister of Health. The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 99-2000, sorry again, looking at my magnifying glass, it was 20% to $200. That was what was existing at the time. It went up in 2001, 30 to 33% to $350. That is where it remains, and we have maintained the 70-30 split. I would like to add that the costs of the pharmacare program itself, as the member opposite knows, have risen steadily. They've risen, more than we could have anticipated. That we're intending to, keep the cap. That we introduced the cap per prescription this year to try to help seniors in terms of the amount they have to pay, for one prescription. That was a recommendation of the Group of 9. I would also like to say that many seniors, including those represented on the Group of 9, while some find the cost of drugs very difficult, most realize that rising costs in our society, they understand that part of that burden has to be borne by them. What they don't want is too much of the burden to be borne by them. And many feel a point of pride in that they should be paying some of their costs. We do have a generous pharmacare program in Nova Scotia, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The pharmacare program and the explanation of it in the both in the estimates and in the supplementary details is pretty insufficient. So it's difficult to know what is involved in the pharmacare program. And so I have a fairly simple question. Can the minister tell us, because the pharmacare program only says pharmacare payments, what percentage of this is involved in administration?
The Minister of Health.
The administration cost, the only thing is the dispensing fee to the pharmacists. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Do we know, what percentage that would be? How much does it cost in dispensing fees? Who processes it when it gets to to the department? Is that not administrative costs?
Quick question to the Minister of Health.
Atlantic Blue Cross, Mr. Chair, pays that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, somebody pays Atlantic Blue Cross. I mean, they don't do it for free, right? Do we know? Okay, but maybe we can go at it from the other end. Do we know how much of the $95 million, $95,692,000 that is estimated for 2003, 2004, how much of it is actually drug costs? So that's the other end.
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health. The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I can have the answer to that question in a few moments if the member would like to ask another question in the meantime. Thank you, Mr.
Minister.
Chair.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. People who are regular watchers of this program out there will know that over the years I've asked and have gotten from the minister and from the previous minister responses to questions around what happens to people when you increase things like the copay or the premium. And as we all know, Mr. Chairman, there was quite an exhaustive study done out of McGill that talked about the number of things that happened to seniors when these costs increase. And they included the increase in mortality rate, an increase in visits to emergency rooms, an increased length of stay in hospital, and increases in the amount of visits to primary care physicians, Mr. Chairman. So these were fairly important and profound effects upon the lives of seniors. And I know the previous minister used to like to say, well, that was a controversial study, and we want to take every effort to try and minimize the research that was done on it. But the reality is that, Mr. Chairman, under this administration, in fact, and over the last couple of years, there's been a study going on in this province on that very thing to verify whether or not the results are the same. And I guess I'd like to know from the minister, have you received the results of that study? And if you have, are you prepared to release them?
Direct that to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have not seen or been informed of that study or the results of that study. I know we have some information, and we can endeavor to get that. We have had, Mr. Chair, a steady increase in the users of the pharmacare plan. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition and the member from Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to figure out what it was the minister said. Now, this study was complete. It was sent to the Department of Health for comment, which I always I find somewhat interesting because, of course, it is a way to reshape the study before it actually becomes public. And I guess what I'm trying to find out is, has the minister or the minister's office, Department of Health, received a final copy of this report, and will they release it?
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if the member would clarify which study he means. My officials here are not aware of the study to which he refers.
Thank you, Minister. On the question of clarification, I'd like to recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, there's a study underway at Dalhousie University the point of which was to follow up on those items that I identified and that were done in the McGill study. It was completed. It was sent to the Department of Health for commentary, and it was sent back. What I want to know is whether or not you know whether or not it's been completed and if you've received a final report.
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If such a study is in the department, we will make inquiries of the woman who runs the pharmacare section to see if she has it, and I will commit to do that. The associate deputy has not seen the study, and I have not seen the study, and we have not been made aware of it if it has been completed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
I guess the other part of that is if committing to find out if there is one thing. Committing it to release it, of course, is a completely different thing. So I'd like to ask the Minister to go to one step further and commit to releasing the report if it's resident within your department.
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Certainly, we will make inquiries, and that would be released. It would be public information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if they've managed to isolate the drug costs as of yet or not.
Question for the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We only have the increase, but we can get that. We can get that for the Leader of the Opposition for tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Leader of the Opposition.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to ask, I guess, an associated question, which has to do with the coverage by pharmacare of Alzheimer's drugs. And I wonder if the Minister could tell us where that discussion is at. And I believe, and I think I have the names right there, Aricept and Remelin. Is that the other one? That I just wanted to know where that is in the scheme of things.
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The work on those drugs has been done by the Atlantic Group. The results and recommendations will be going to the deputies of the Atlantic provinces within a week or two. What we're looking at is that if we are able to provide coverage for these drugs or some of these drugs, that we would agree to adhere to certain protocols and do some original research as well here in the Atlantic provinces, that we would also provide some physician education on the use of these drugs and whether to continue use under some circumstances. As I understand it, they can be effective, but they're not necessarily effective forever. And what we would need to do is try to provide the education to physicians on the different forms of dementias and which drug would help which people. This would not only be because we want people to have the best drugs that are affordable, but also we would like to be able to obviously be able to predict the costs. And I believe the figure that I was last given for an estimate of the cost here in Nova Scotia for a year of even covering these drugs with very strict protocols would be about $3.7 million. But we are moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I must say, I don't know if it's a false sense of optimism, but I sensed from what the Minister says that they know what the recommendation is going to be, and she seems to be talking about things that are post it being added to the formulary. So I'm going to take that as a positive sign, and then I'm going to ask the follow-up question, which is, if that is the cost associated with those drugs, is it allowed for in this year's estimates?
Thank you for the question. I'll direct that to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, that is not allowed for in this year's estimates, because we did not necessarily plan on doing it this year. Obviously, that could change. I would like to add something as well, that it would take a little bit of time to introduce. So even if we did decide to go ahead, we would not be looking at a full year's cost this year if we were to go ahead. And another comment I'd like to make about the common formulary, even though we in the Atlantic provinces do prefer to go together rather than hang separately on some of these things, the option is always there to accept or not accept a recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Can I ask the Minister, would there be any reason why, when that recommendation comes forward, would there be any reason why that recommendation would not be released so that we would know what the recommendation was?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, there's no reason why it wouldn't be. It would be up to the premiers and the ministers to decide that, but there would be no other reason for not releasing that information. It would be a decision by the premiers and the health ministers.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to advise the member from Dartmouth Cole Harbour he has 19 minutes left in turn, and I recognize the member.
I realize it's just a short time left together, so I'll try to do my best to get through as many questions as I can. I didn't quite understand that last reply, because you seem to be mixing two things here. One is the decision of whether or not the recommendation which would be followed, which would be a question for the ministers and the premiers to decide, and the question of whether or not the substance of the recommendation would be released. And I'm wondering if I'm missing it, if there's some reason why the substance of the recommendation wouldn't be released, so that we would know what the recommendation was, even if the decision of the ministers or the premiers are not to not follow it.
Thank you for the question. I recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, I see no reason why the recommendation would not be released, regardless of the decision made at the political level whether to cover these drugs or not. Obviously, decisions are made partly on a basis of affordability, as all government decisions are. I think that the recommendation would probably release itself, even if governments did not release it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Minister, recognize Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to now move on to something which I have again been addressing with various ministers of health over the last couple of years, and this one has to do with hepatitis C. And you may know, Madam Minister, as I do, that there was an agreement between the federal government and the provincial government with respect to hepatitis C, and there was money allocated by the federal government that was supposed to be put into specific programming for the sufferers of hepatitis C. And indeed, on page 12.11 of your estimates, there is a line item that says hepatitis C recovery. I guess what I'd like to know is what programming that is specific to the sufferers of hepatitis C is being provided by the provincial government, and for which you are recovering, I see $500,000.
The Minister of Health. Minister of Health.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do have a list of some of the programming that we provide. The money that comes from the federal government is $6 million over 20 years.
Yeah, 20.
20 years. And obviously, a lot more than that is spent in the province on programs for hepatitis C patients. We spend roughly in Nova Scotia about $2.5 million a year on such programs as genotyping and the liver clinic and specialists and vaccines, for instance, hepatitis A vaccine for all hepatitis C sufferers. And there are a number of programs, and I can get that list. The federal contribution, although we have not been as clear about it as we might have been, if you average out the money over the amount of time, it would be about $300,000 a year. And we're certainly spending as a province far more than that on services to victims of hepatitis C. Now, are there services and drugs we're not providing? Probably yes. And is there more we could do? Probably yes. But I can't see that we're not spending the federal money and more on programs for people with hepatitis C. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize Leader of the Opposition.
The point, Mr. Chairman, was that there were in existence at the time many, as far as I know, all of the programs that exist today, and the idea of this designated money was to be used for new programming over and above what was already in existence. Much like the money from the Department of Housing that came from the federal government, it was to add to the ability of the department to provide service. That was the idea from here. Now, so I have two questions on it, but the first one is, can you identify what new programming is supported by this money as opposed to the programming that existed beforehand?
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do know that the genotyping is new, and the money that we give to the Hepatitis C Society is new, but I have to go back and double check what else might be new, but definitely those two. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Leader of the Opposition.
The Minister was indicating, and I noticed that the forecast under Hep C recovery is some $981.5 thousand last year. This year it's estimated at about $500,000. I think the Minister said it was $6 million over 5 years. Was that, or sorry, $6 million over 20 years. And at that rate, that $6 million would be drawn down a heck of a lot faster than 20 years. I think if you averaged it out over 20 years, it would be about $300,000 a year. Does the Minister know how much money is actually left in that fund to be drawn down?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the amounts that come each year are not the same amounts each year. They don't come in regular increments, and I can get back to the member in more detail on that. But I do know that they don't come at $300,000 a year or whatever. They come in different increments from the federal government.
Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I understand that, and of course, just to give you an example, Mr. Chairman, the actual in 2001-2002 was $2 million. Last year, it's $981,000. Next year, it's going to be $500,000. So, of a $6 million fund, that's some $3.3 million that's gone over the 3 years that I can see on the documents that are before me, which must mean over the 17 years left to come, it's going to become rapidly diminishing amounts of money. Is that in fact the case?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
resign.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this is one of the programs from the federal government that was front-end loaded as opposed to back-end loaded, like some of the other money that's coming for health. So it's my understanding that most of the provinces have taken it this way in front-end loaded monies, so that the increments will continue to be unequal and some years not available. I believe so.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Okay. And I guess that was really my question, because it seemed obvious to me that at that rate it was going to be depleted fairly quickly. I wanted to ask a little bit about the information technology initiatives that are in the estimates, because it goes from $11,842,000 to $22,123,000, and if you look back between 2001 and now, there has been a pretty significant increase in the amount of information technology initiatives. I guess what I'd like to know is if you could indicate to us what it is that we're getting for that money, and whether or not this is a one-time increase in the cost, and that we'll see it fall back next year to something closer to, I don't know whether it would be the average of $5 million and $11 million, or I mean, do we have some sense of what in a year should be the amount of money we're going to be spending in information technology?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, the capital in any district or any area would only occur once, at least. We all know with information systems it happens again and again, but for a major initiative, only once for a period of time, but the operating costs would be ongoing. So this is actually an initiative that we would like to be able to roll out faster than what we have done. But we are proceeding because it is one of those areas that actually really is an investment as opposed to an expenditure, because we will be able to provide doctors and patients and paramedics and nurses with information about patients that will be really useful to them. There'll be a lot of duplication that will be able to be avoided. This is also something that the federal government is very keen on having developed nationwide. An information system of that type, though, that we have here would probably, right now, are estimated to cost $4 billion to achieve Canada-wide. But we really need to have the kind of information available whereby if you were from Dartmouth and you were in a car accident in Sydney, that a paramedic would be able to access your medical record to know about your history, to know what drugs you're allergic to, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not really pie in the sky that we will be able to do that within a few years. This year, the operating cost for the DHAs is about $5 million. And the system is being rolled out in Antigonish and Cape Breton to start. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Leader of the Opposition.
This is different than DHA funding. I mean, you have your DHA funding that is listed line by line in here, right? This is an additional healthcare initiative that you would work with in conjunction, I assume, with the various health authorities. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, are they capital costs? Are they operating costs? What can we expect when I look at the books in 5 years' time and look back and average the cost of information technology, given that there will be some natural increases, inflationary pressures? But I mean, am I going to see a constantly rising number in this, or next year is it going to be closer to 11 last year, or is it going to be closer to 6 that was the year before? I mean, what am I What am I seeing?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, you're seeing amortization costs and operating costs. So there will be a bubble, Mr. Chair, as the capital costs finish up, but then it should level out. This is money that, in the jargon, is held centrally from the data center, but it is done with the DHAs in conjunction with them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Leader of the Opposition.
I understand that the minister is really attempting to give me the information that I want here, but maybe I'm not making myself clear. What I'm trying to figure out is next year, are we going to see another $22 million figure? And I guess what I'm trying to know is, in that bubble, have we reached the top, and are we going back down, or are we still going up?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, we haven't reached the top. Next year, you'll see an increase, likely not as big as the increase this year, but there will be an increase, and a lot of it will be capital costs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to just briefly ask the minister if she is aware of a program, the Child and Adolescent Day Treatment Service that exists at the IWK. This is a service to children and teenagers. As I understand it, there are 12 full-time adolescent spots and 6 part-time spots, and then there are 12 spots for children only. The majority of the cases that are treated there are children who suffer from ADD and ADHD and depression. This is the only service of its kind in the province. It is obviously very difficult for people outside the metro area to access. Some of them who do access it from outside come in and stay in group homes in order to access it. When you actually ask them, what is the waiting list in order to get into that program, they're very hesitant to tell you, mainly because it is geared on to need. So if you're in an emergency, much like when you go into an emergency room, they categorize you, and you don't get seen on first come, first served. You get seen as it's important for you to be seen. But the reality is that there are some very, very long waiting lists for children who need that kind of help in that program. And what I'd like to ask the minister is, has this come to her attention, and is there some plan for dealing with this to see that the children of the province who need this assistance actually get it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have heard of this program, but I'm not aware of the details that the Leader of the Opposition presented. I do know that this was not presented as a priority pressure by the IWK in its business plan. I can say that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Leader of the Opposition, you have 5 minutes remaining.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go back just to long-term care for a second because we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask a couple of questions about it. The assessments that are done for the eligibility review unit, in most cases, I guess, are done, in fact, by the community care coordinators. Is that right?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. The care assessments are done by those coordinators. In other words, determining whether a person needs to go to a nursing home or not. But the financial assessments are done by the eligibility review unit centrally. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Leader of the Opposition.
So you're saying that the community care coordinators don't play any role whatsoever in the administration or collection of financial information of people who are being assessed by the Eligibility Review Unit. Just want to be clear.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I understand it, the care coordinators, they may ask a couple of questions, but the actual major assessment, the full financial assessment, is handed over to people in the Eligibility Review Unit in the city.
The Leader of the Opposition, you just have over 2 minutes.
In their job descriptions, in the community care coordinator's job description, is any portion of their job assigned to that particular, which is financial eligibility?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is very minimal now. It used to be that it was the job of the care coordinators to do this before we went to the provincial waiting list and the new system that was meant to see that people who in the most need got to care first. When we changed that part of the system, went to single entry access. But the care coordinators now are not supposed to be doing this financial review. That is a job of the review unit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, I wonder if the minister could tell us how many people work in the Eligibility Review Unit.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, there are about 8 to 12 people. When I say people, there are some vacant positions there as well, but there are about 8 to 12 people in that review unit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Wonder if the minister would be able to indicate to us what the salary and benefit costs for that unit are over a year.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those costs are about $750,000 a year, and those costs by April 1st, 2007 will no longer be associated with that unit because we won't need the unit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Leader of the Opposition, you have 50 seconds left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to very generously cede the rest of my time.
Thank you. I recognize the member from Cape Breton West. You have 1 hour starting at 3:45.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring to the attention of all members of the committee the very special day for a colleague of ours, the member for Cape Breton Nova, is celebrating his 60th birthday. Oh. And I think it's only befitting that we recognize this rather skillful. He's, yes, that's correct. Well, he's far more youthful than the Premier, if that's what you're alluding to. But my first question, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister is with regards to the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation. As the Minister may be aware, in weeks past, we had a representative from the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation before public accounts to address a number of concerns that members of the committee had. And one in particular with regards to the fact that the previous Minister of Health consistently budgeted $2.5 million for the Research Foundation, when in fact they were receiving $5.0 million. And I would ask if the Minister has received official request from the Research Foundation for $5 million this year. I must apologize, I didn't get a chance to kind of go through the micro detail to see if, in fact, that's what's budgeted for this year or not. But I would suspect that it is. If the minister could confirm that, and if the minister could also confirm if there was a request for additional monies over and above the $5 million, and what would that represent?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I was aware of the session at Public Accounts. The grant this year to the foundation, it's in the supplements, is $4.5 million. And I know that the ask was for beyond the 5, but I don't have that detail with me now. I can find that out. But I'm well aware the Auditor General questioned where the other 2.5 came from. So this year we've given them 4.5, and it's straight up. And they'll be able to continue with some very good research and matching grants. We would like to have given more, but 4.5 it is for this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 12.11 of the estimates, the supplementary detail for the forecast of 2002-2003, they're forecasting $2.5 million. That's totally contrary to what was presented to the members of Public Accounts, and I'm wondering where that other $2.5 million went that the minister seemed to have missed in her response.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because of money left over from a previous year, they would be able to spend that money for a total of 5. But as I understand it, because they are part of our consolidated accounting, that the Auditor General would prefer the money accounted for a different way, which is what we're attempting to do this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
The fact of the matter is, Mr. Chairman, they get caught. They get caught budgeting $2.5 million when, in fact, they were allocating $5 million. And the witness before Public Accounts conceded to that point. So I would ask the minister again if she could ascertain as to where the other $2.5 million is that should be budgeted in the forecast.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the money came from unexpended funds. But as I understand it, the carryover procedure is what the Auditor General objected to. So we are attempting to change that this year by saying at the beginning of the year that the grant is 4.5, and that is what it will be. And we're not expecting, there's no unspent money from previous years to spend. This is the grant of 4.5. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
I hate to sound a little facetious, but I think she's taking lessons from the Prime Minister on new money, old money, and old money, new money. As I understand from the witness at Public Accounts, they applied for $2.5 million in their first year. They received $5 million. The second year, they applied for $2.5 million. Well, that's what was budgeted for. And they received $5 million. And the witness indicated that, and I stand to be corrected, that they were planning on applying for upwards of $7.5 million. It was well in excess of $5 million anyway. And now the minister is saying that that's not the case. Could the minister through you, Mr. Chair, please confirm as to what the Research Foundation applied for. Do we have any documentation as to what they applied for? And would you please provide that to the members of the committee?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I believe I answered that question at the outset, but I will repeat my answer. The foundation, to the best of my knowledge, did apply for more than $5 million. I do not have that documentation with me. I would be glad to provide the information. They applied for more than $5 million, but what we have provided for and what they are getting is $4.5 million. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Could the minister, since she knows that they applied for more, give us some indication as to what the Research Foundation applied for? How much?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I said, I don't have that documentation in front of me. It is in none of the briefing books, but I would be glad to supply that information to the member when I get it from the department. I know or believe that they applied for more than $5 million. I know they indicated they were going to be asking for about 7.5. Most people, as the member is well aware, and most organizations apply for more than what they get, and that is the case here. But the exact amount they applied for, I will supply that information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I agree with the minister that most organizations, they will apply for more than what they'll generally receive because of pressures on government. Ironically, for the first 2 years, they only applied for half of what they received. And there didn't appear to be any paper trail to confirm the concerns as to why they would apply for $2.5 million and receive $5 million. And that was essentially the concern that was raised at public accounts. So I'm glad to see that the minister is now kind of correcting that process, because it's the first time in 3 years that we've actually seen some accountability. Well, we're going to take the minister at her word that she will provide that paper trail, because that was a concern not only by members of the opposition, but also by the Auditor General's office. One of the issues that were raised at public accounts, obviously it's a committee for doing value for dollar for the taxpayers. We kind of did a cursory review of some of the reports, you know, that were the projects that were supported financially, the research projects, and one of them was with a $47,500 research grant to Kenneth Rockwell, entitled "A Novel Outcome Measure: Developing a New Outcome Measures for Detection of Disease Progression in Treating Alzheimer's Disease." And in fact, I asked if the representative from the Research Foundation would provide us with a copy of that report. To date, we have not received that report. Has the minister seen this particular report, and would she be kind enough to provide members of the committee as to what the department has done with that particular report in terms of making a decision as to whether the department would fund such medications as Aricept or any other type of medication to deal with the progression of Alzheimer's?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will double check on that, but the practice is that as soon as a study is finished, it is public. People doing research generally want as much publicity as they can get for their study. So certainly it's not something that we have that we're keeping to ourselves. I mean, the Health Foundation, you know, commissions the research and pays people for the research, and it will be made public as soon as it's done. I'll certainly double check for the member. but it would appear that the study is not yet complete. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I beg to differ with the minister because I spoke with the committee staff just moments before I came in to ask questions, and my understanding is that the representative from the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation was going to supply that information. Pardon? Yes. Was going to provide that information the first week of April. Now, that has passed, and no one's heard anything. So I would ask if the minister could endeavor. I'm sure that individual would not have been paid unless there was a final report prepared, because the indications are from the presentation of public accounts, that individual, as I understood the presentation, the way it was listed, is that that individual was paid. Maybe I'm not correct on that, but essentially, to cut through all the detail, we would like to know if the Department of Health is aware of this report. Can you tell us with certainty as to whether it has been or has not been concluded? We haven't been able to determine that, and where does it fit into the issue of determining whether the department will proceed with medication such as Aricept or what have you? And I think this here report would certainly be helpful in determining as to whether the use of medication such as Aricept or whatever other medication could be applied to help to prevent or reduce the effects of alcohol.